Thank you. Thank you. Erwin McManus said, if everything else remains uncertain, be clear on this point. There is a calling on your life. There's a level of clarity you can have about what to do next. Serving others functions like a compass in the midst of a fog. Faith is not only about trusting the character of God, but also about transforming your character. My mind goes back to the day I had the privilege of taking 50 Liberty University students on a trip to China, much like the trips we're going to talk about tonight in our meeting. And before leaving on the trip, I received a phone call from a gentleman who wanted to know if we would be willing to transport some Bibles inside of our checked luggage from Hong Kong to Beijing. I told him we would be honored. And in a communist country, you don't check in as a group. Airport personnel and the secret police look at every piece of luggage, open every handbag, check every passport. When I arrived in Hong Kong, they said, Vernon, you've got to come to your room. They've delivered the Bibles. I said, good. They said, no, it's not good. You've got to come and see. And I opened the door to my hotel room, and from the floor to the ceiling were stacked 10,000 Chinese Bibles. After some quick calculating and some trial and error, we realized we needed to go out and buy 112 duffel bags. Jonathan Falwell was a student at Liberty at the time, and he was on that trip, and he came up and he said, Vernon, I've got my dad's credit card if you need it. And I said, not now, Jonathan, I've got this covered, just hang on to it. And when we arrived at the Hong Kong airport, the attendants put the bags on the scales and said, sir, you're overweight. What do you have in these bags? I said, we're Liberty University students, we like to read. Praying they wouldn't open it up and ask us to read one of them. She said, that will be $1,150 in overweight charges. I said, Jonathan, let me see that credit card. When I got home, I told Jerry Falwell, thanks for the Bibles. And we arrived in Beijing. Picture this, 50 college students with 10,000 Bibles coming off the conveyor belt in 112 matching duffel bags. Not too conspicuous. And I kept thinking, what are we going to do? What have I gotten these students into? And I moved over to the corner and remember praying a prayer like this. God, if you've got a plan to get these Bibles through customs, now would be a good time to share it with me. And I looked up and I saw a cart, big, huge cart, and I got this idea, and I had everybody stack all the duffel bags on the cart, and then we covered it over with our jackets and guitars, and I said, everybody give me your passport. So I'm holding on to 50 American passports with this giant luggage cart and 50 students behind me. And I walked up to customs and said, hey, we're Americans. Newsflash. We're Americans from Liberty University. This is our first trip to China. And I think I just caught them off guard. They started stuttering, didn't know what to say. They said, well, come in, welcome to our country. And it was like God opened the Red Sea. Out of nowhere, a man walked up to me and whispered in my ear, He said, place 4 bags on the sidewalk and go to your bus. We'll contact you later at your hotel. Man, I felt like I was in a James Bond movie. I said, I was made for this. So we put 4 bags on the sidewalk, and I couldn't help but looking back. And I saw 4 Chinese men pick up those bags and put them in the trunks of 4 taxis and speed off in 4 different directions. A few nights later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, another Chinese man stood outside. He handed me a manila envelope and said, follow these instructions. And he turned and left. Boy, my juices started flowing again. The cover letter said, half of your group will not feel like going to dinner tomorrow. They will be conveniently absent. The half that doesn't go to dinner will break into groups of 2 and make sure they follow their instructions explicitly. One set of instructions said, a group of 4 will carry 1 bag each out the front door of the hotel at precisely 8 p.m. Get into the taxi that's waiting and go wherever it takes you. That's my definition of faith. And I pray, dear God, don't let these students ever tell their mothers what I've just done. The student body president of Liberty was on that trip with us. When he came back, I said, how had it gone? He said, tonight was the most incredible night of my entire Christian life. I said, tell me about it. He said, well, we drove around for an hour to make sure we weren't being followed, and we pulled up in front of this little house, and we got out, and there was a house church meeting in it with an 86-year-old woman leading the service, and she had been led to Christ by Watchman Nee, one of the pioneers in the China revival movement, and the author of one of the best Christian books ever written, The Normal Christian Life. And he said, and I got to meet her, and he said, when we got there, they were all on their knees praying for Bibles. And in we walk with all these bags, and they started hugging us and kissing us and hugging the Bibles, and they worshiped for 3 hours. He said, it was indescribable. I wish I had read the instructions a little better. I would have liked to have had that one. But no, mine said, go out the side door of the hotel, carrying 2 bags each, and walk for 4 blocks. So I'm standing on this street corner with all these Bibles, a group of 4 of us, and a van pulls up, and the door slides open, and some guy says, get in. We get in. There were no seats in the van, so we just sat on the bags of Bibles. We too drove around for an hour to make sure we weren't followed. Then we ended up on the campus of the leading university in Beijing. We made our way to the back of the campus to a dormitory, very quietly carried those Bibles up 4 flights of stairs in a dorm room, where a quiet knock on the door, we were received by a Chinese Christian with tears in his eyes. We placed the Bibles in the middle of the floor and all stood around and held hands and prayed over them. And they told me, they said, by this time tomorrow, these Bibles will be distributed all over this campus. That was May 1989. Little did I know that coming home jet-lagged and tired, that a few days later I would turn on CNN and see thousands of Beijing University students assembled in Tiananmen Square in their march for freedom, standing up to their government. I'll never forget the image of that one student standing erect in front of that Chinese tank. I'll never forget the night that 4,000 Chinese university students were murdered in Tiananmen Square. Some of them had to be believers, and some of them had to receive those Bibles that we had brought, and some of them changed the world. Today, we're still smuggling Bibles into China, but this time they're not hidden in large duffel bags. We're a little more discreet now, especially since security has tightened its grip more than ever before. I've actually met Chinese house church pastors who have been caught with a copy of the Bible, who have spent as many as 5 years in prison just for having a Bible. To make things more difficult, you say, well, why can't they just have access to the internet? Every year, the Chinese government blocks 1 million internet sites. They can't Google like you can Google. So we've been able to devise a new strategy. We've been able to distribute thousands of these USB drives disguised as a key. I don't know whether you can see it or not. Each USB drive contains thousands of pages, dozens of books worth of precious information, including a full copy of the Bible in English, a full copy of the Bible in Mandarin, other resources, worship songs, commentaries, videos, the Jesus film, the full presentation of the gospel, and through very strategic distribution. One USB drive can impact 1,000 laptops in China. So the impact is truly incredible, and it's igniting a movement in China like never before. And it all began with a group of Liberty University students just like you, willing to take a giant leap of faith, wanting to change their world. The next few years hold a world of promise for each one of you. You have decided to come to the world's largest evangelical university, where you'll be trained to scale unimaginable heights. But the question is this: will you use all 4 years to discover how you can impact your world, or will you just sit comfortably and say, I'm just a college student, or I'm just a business major, or I'm pre-law? That really doesn't apply to me. Will you climb into the unknown like so many Liberty University students before you, even in the face of uncertainty, or will you play it safe? McManus asked the question this way: in your moment of truth, what will you choose? Will you choose the wilderness or adventure? Have you confused the blessing of God with wealth, comfort, and security? Have you considered that His greatest blessing comes when He calls us to be pioneers, explorers, or even conquerors? Will you dare to live a life of adventure? And when you do, you will live in the epicenter of God's activity. You know where to begin. Take initiative. Impact the world by fighting the battles that are on God's heart. When I was at Liberty, there was a famine in Africa. I'd survived cancer. My immune system was compromised. My voice, the vocal cords had been paralyzed. I couldn't speak, but I wanted to do something, so I took a group of students. We chartered a plane in Nairobi, Kenya, and flew up over the equator and landed on a gravel runway near Sudan. We saw a village of grass huts. On the way there, I saw tribal women on their hands and knees in a dry riverbed digging for water, and I was told that there was no water there, and if they found water, it would be contaminated and do them more harm than good. They were trucking water in 80 kilometers one way every day just to survive. When I got to the village of Grass Huts, I walked up, saw this one hut with an opening on it, and stuck my head inside and saw a little 9-year-old girl with all she had on was a pair of pants, no top, no shoes. Her hair was matted, her nose was running. There were open sores on her body. Her belly was distended from malnutrition, and the smell was unbearable. And I took one look at her, and the words of my doctor, "Be careful what you touch," were ringing in my ear. And I repulsed. I went, ugh, and took a step back. And the Spirit of God said, "Wait just a minute. Who do you think you are?" I love that little girl. I love that little girl as much as I love your little girl. And I've commanded you to love that little girl also. And I was convicted at that moment. And partly out of conviction and partly out of impulse, I reached down and grabbed her and held her, and later found out I was the first white person she had ever seen. I probably scared her to death. And I communicated with her through the international language of love. I touched her cheek, I smiled, and I tried to let her know that I cared. And at that moment, out of that hut came her mother and father and brothers and sisters and grandparents, and how there were so many people in one hut. And not just that hut, but every hut in the village was emptied, and I was surrounded by these tribal people, and one man was blind, and one man had a tumor on his neck, and one man had his leg was huge with elephantitis. And I looked at the blind and the lame and the diseased and realized what Jesus must have felt when he looked upon the multitudes and had compassion. I shared good news with those Turkana tribesmen and women. I told them that the one true living God sent his Son to this earth to live a sinless life, to die a cruel death on the cross, to be buried in a tomb, and to rise victorious over death in payment of our sin. And many of them chose to become Christ's followers that day. And when it was over, they begged me for water. You can't live without water. And before I knew it, not even knowing what it cost to drill a well, the words were out of my mouth, "We'll do it." I came home. I stood here at Liberty University and told this story and said, "Will you help me keep my promise?" And within a week, Liberty University students had raised enough money to drill those wells. And not only that, not only did they give their money, they stepped up and gave their lives. 10 students said, "We're going to take a semester out of school and we're going to go there and oversee the drilling of the wells." And they started a school and they started a clinic and they built a church. And at the end of the semester, they came home and 10 more took their place. And at the end of the second semester, they came home and 10 more took their place. And 3 years later, when the project of the Liberty Pioneers was done, every person in that village had become a follower of Jesus Christ. Those Liberty University students that summer changed the world. Just think with me. Just think with me what this student body could do. In 2013 and 14, with all of the technology we have, just think what we can do. I beg you tonight to take a leap of faith and go to that meeting at Thomas Road. You say, "Well, I'm busy," or "I'll catch it later." No, God is waiting for you to take that step of faith so he can bless you, bless your life, bless your future, and use you to change the world. Don't limit God by not showing up. I believe God wants to use this student body to do something that will outlast you and last for eternity, to change the world. The only question is, what's stopping you? A few days ago, I'm sure most of you have seen it, on August 18th, Nicholas Selby, a Georgia Tech student, went nuts in his impassioned convocation speech to the freshman class. It's gone viral. The last time I checked, over 2 million views. He said, "We chose Georgia Tech because we want to do the impossible. And this school is equipped with the resources and faculty to do just that." I'm telling you, if you want to change the world, you're at Georgia Tech. You can do that. And then he just went ballistic. I mean, it was just incredible. Google it if you haven't seen it. But to paraphrase Nick this morning, I say to you, you chose Liberty University because you want to do the impossible. If you want to change the world, you're at Liberty University. You can do that. If you want to reach your world with the gospel, you're at Liberty University. You can do that. If we want to do something that will outlive us and last for eternity, we are Liberty University. We can do that. We can change the world. That's all I got.